Pathagonia. This is Jay. Today we are going to talk about pumpkins, PUNLMPs, as well as inverted papillomas and low-grade papillary urothelial carcinoma, as well as this special treat. Before we begin, thank you to past presenter for these amazing slides. So this is a 50-year-old patient who's immunocompromised and had UTI-like symptoms like dysuria or pain with urination. So we see fragments from a transurethral, or this would be like a cystoscopy with a biopsy, and they probably saw some like white plaques. And so I see a lot of kind of cautery effect on the edges here. And as we zoom in here, I'm not suspecting a urothelial neoplasm or proliferation because it doesn't look kind of like that squamous urothelial look that you get. It looks more like inflammation as well as some scattered blood vessels. So let's zoom in closer here. So we have some kind of histiocytes as well against a background of kind of lymphus with acute inflammation and some lymphocytes as well. And this is Malakoplakia. Malakoplakia is characterized by foamy histiocytes that try to ingest gram-negative bacterium. So here's a foamy histiocytes. And they try to ingest gram-negative bacterium. And they're undigested, they're not killed. Usually they're E. coli or Proteus, and there's a response, an inflammatory response. And the pathognomonic finding for Malakoplakia are these amorphous calcium or iron. So if you do a von Casa stain, it will light up. It could be in the histiocytes, and it could also be in the background. And the way I look for the Michaelis-Gutmann bodies are they're smaller than all the other nuclei, and they shouldn't have a nucleolus. So treatments are antibiotics that target those histiocytes that contain the undigested bacterium. So to recap, Malakoplakia, kind of a response to the histiocytes that have engulfed undigested bacteria. You'll see foamy histiocytes that, I forgot to mention this, but will light up with PAS. And you'll see characteristic Michaelis-Gutmann bodies. All right, now we got that special treat done. Let's talk about this. So this is a female patient in her 60s. She had hematuria. So she rightly went to the urologist, and they did a cystoscopy and a turbot, a transurethral resection of bladder tumor. And here, it looks scary. From low power, I'm thinking, wow, this is really cellular because it's blue. You don't see a lot of eosinophilia, or you don't see a lot of pink. So as we zoom in here, kind of reminds me of like Medusa's head, kind of. You see these anastomosing cords of cells. And let's zoom in closer. Here you have these kind of palisading urothelium. And this is the basal layer. You can easily tell, along with some proliferation of the intermediate layer. So it looks scary. This is an inverted papilloma. And it looks scary, but the key is looking closer, and you're gonna appreciate that there's no mites. The polarity is preserved, meaning that there's like an order where you know what side is the bottom portion and which side is kind of the top portion of the urothelium. So there's a little bit of kind of reactive changes, but you don't see prominent nucleoli. You don't see cells that are extremely different from each other. You don't see mitoses, and they kind of have that spindled appearance. So this is an inverted papilloma and can be treated by just resecting the papilloma. And just to recap, you're going to see anastomosing cords of urothelium. They're going to have some palisading of the basal layer. And they're going to have a proliferation of the urothelium, but they should not have any mites. They can be a little bit spindled. There can be a little bit of reactive changes, but there will be retained polarity. Inverted papilloma. Now let's go here. Oh boy, this is very fragmented. So this is what I see from here is an exophytic lesion. Let's say this is a 60-year-old male who had hematuria. He's a smoker. No prior history of urothelial carcinoma though. And they did another transurethral resection of bladder tumor. Now these are all fragmented, but I can see from low power that they're exophytic, meaning they're growing outwards. And as we zoom here, we can see these fibrovascular cores, so they're papillary. And remember that urothelium, normal urothelium has like 5 to 7 layers, with the top layer being the umbrella cells. Here, if you count, it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And here's a cross tangential cut, so this, that's not as great. But here, you can see it's more than 9. It's more than 5 to 7. So as we zoom in here closer, we can appreciate that there's polarity, right? We can still know that this is the bottom layer and this is the top layer, and there's no significant atypia, right? More or less, these cells kind of look similar. So this is a papillary urothelial neoplasm of low malignant potential. PUNLMP, not pumpkin, PUNLMP. This is like one of my favorite entities just to say PUNLMP, PUNLMP, PUNLMP. So this has a more dangerous behavior than your normal papilloma, but it's less dangerous than your kind of low-grade urothelial papillary carcinoma. So just to recap, on low power, you'll see kind of a mostly exophytic lesion. They'll have fibrovascular cores, and as you zoom in, you're gonna think to yourself, man, this seems much more thickened than your normal urothelium. And then as you zoom in closer, you're gonna see that the polarity is maintained. The cells are more or less not atypical. There are no mites. And so that's gonna make you think towards PUNLMP. You know, if it's inverted and there's a lot of palisading in the basal layer, your differential would be like an inverted papilloma. All right, let's go to this guy. So on low power, it kind of reminds me of just from low power, it kind of reminds me of an inverted papilloma, kind of what we saw before, right? But let's zoom in closer. Even from here, I can see that these cells are the urothelium is very hyperplastic. And it's kind of hard vaguely to kind of appreciate where the bottom is from the top. Like here, I don't know what is the top, what is the bottom. But we can still see the fibrovascular core, so this is a papillary neoplasm. So let's zoom in closer. So as I zoom in closer, I really don't know what the bottom layer is and what the top layer is. And you can see here, there's a mite. So this, because there's more nuclear pleomorphisms, because there's a loss of polarity at higher magnification, this is a low-grade papillary neoplasm of the bladder. So let's zoom in here. You see we have a mite here, we have a mite here, but these cells aren't so pleomorphic that this was called a high-grade urothelial papillary neoplasm. So just to recap, for low-grade papillary urothelial neoplasms, they're going to be very hyperplastic, the urothelial layer. And to differentiate this from a PUNLMP is, as you zoom in closer, you really can't tell where the bottom is and the top is. And you'll have some mites, but you won't have mites here and there and there and there and there and there. In that case, it would be a high-grade urothelial neoplasm. So this kind of finding will be good for a low-grade urothelial papillary neoplasm. So just to recap, we went over Malakoplakia. You're going to see those Michaelis-Gutmann bodies, and it's a response to those foamy histiocytes that engulfed gram-negative bacteria. Then we went over inverted papilloma. There's going to be some like peripheral palisading and no atypia whatsoever. There's going to be maintained polarity. You might have a little bit of spindled. PUNLMPs we saw is generally exophytic lesion. It's got the fibrovascular cores, as you can see, and the urothelium is it's much thicker than your usual normal urothelium. But there's still a maintained polarity. There's no mites, and the cells are more or less the same. And then your low-grade urothelial papillary neoplasm, you'll have kind of, as you go higher, it's kind of hard to know what is top, what is bottom, and then you'll have some mites, as well as increased thickness. So, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and until next time, see you. Don't eat PUNLMPs, eat pumpkins.